breakdown. "I knew something was amiss," huffed Annie. Thomas's brakes had locked as he was moving over the points to collect his coaches, resulting in Annie and Clarabelle being trapped in the carriage sheds and their passengers being given to Bertie. "I thought your brakes sounded like they needed to be seen too, but no one listens to anxious Annie, now do they? And our poor passengers now have to ride the buses instead," cried Clarabelle from the back of the shed. "I just hope Bertie watches his speed around the corners, and that he remembers to toot hello to Mrs. Kindly when he passes her cottage. This all could have been avoided if you had let your driver check you over last night before going home. I did tell our guard to remind him," Annie complained. "But I felt fine yesterday," puffed Thomas. "Driver thinks—" "It doesn't matter what your driver thinks, Thomas. The only person's thoughts I'm concerned about is the Fat Controller's," said Annie gravely. "Oh, what if he thinks we're unreliable and has us replaced with newer coaches?" sighed Clarabelle. "But this wasn't your fault," Thomas started. "It was—" "Your fault for not keeping a closer eye on your brakes," interrupted Annie. "We can't be responsible for our passengers if you can't be responsible for your own maintenance," concluded Clarabelle. It was lucky Thomas's fire had been put out. He felt so frustrated he thought he might boil over there and then. A shrill whistle cut through the air as James arrived with a flatbed and short crane to take Thomas away. "Decided to take the day off, did we, Thomas? Perhaps the Fat Controller should give me your branch line and send you back to the big station. I'm always fit and able for work," James wished. "Listen here, James," barked Thomas. "I am—" "A really useful engine," protested Annie. "I thought of all engines you should sympathize with having trouble with your brakes, James. Besides, we've heard how you handle coaches, and we don't fancy having our brakes mended with bootlaces, do we, Annie?" cut in Clarabelle. "Certainly not. And what is so wrong with shunting at the big station? It builds an engine's character and gives them plenty of respect for rolling stock," said Annie. "If anything, I think it would do you good to shunt at the big station for a while. It might teach you not to speak out of turn," finished Clarabelle. As Thomas was being loaded onto the flatbed, he noticed James remaining respectfully silent. He then looked over at his coaches and smiled warmly. Although he had been chewed out by them, he was glad that Annie and Clarabelle would always be behind him, in more ways than one.
On the line. Thomas the Tank Engine loves his work on his branch line. He enjoys pulling passenger trains with his dear and ever-faithful coaches Annie and Clarabelle. They sing songs to one another as they puffed up and down the line, stopping from station to station. Often they will meet Bertie the bus at some of the stations to collect and drop off passengers. Thomas and Bertie are firm friends. But one morning, Bertie was incredibly late to the station, which made Thomas cross. "I knew Bertie could be a slowpoke, but this is ridiculous," he puffed angrily as he blew steam. The waiting passengers were growing as impatient as Thomas. They were about to complain to the station master when they heard a horn in the distance. Poor Bertie rode into the station, trying to catch his breath. "I am sorry, Thomas. There is roadworks being done in the town. I had to go the long way around," panted Bertie. "Huh!" sniffed Thomas. "Rails have always been better than roads. Take my advice, Bertie. Scrap your tires and get nice sturdy wheels like mine. Then you could almost be as useful as me." Bertie frowned as Thomas chortled away. Annie and Clarabelle gave the bus pitying looks as they passed. For the rest of the week, Bertie continued to be delayed by the roadworks. Each time he met Thomas, he'd apologize for being late, but Thomas would only tease him and boast about his rails. Bertie found it all exhausting. "Never fail with rail, that's what I say," jeered Thomas whenever they met. "Be kind to Bertie, he's doing his best. Be kind to Bertie, he's doing his best," sang Annie and Clarabelle crossly as they ran behind Thomas. Thomas was becoming far too boastful for his own good. He began sneering at the roads and the vehicles that traveled on them. One bright and sunny morning, Thomas was dozing comfortably in his shed as his fire began burning brightly. His driver and fireman soon arrived for work. "Come on, Thomas, we must collect the milk," reminded his driver as he pulled Thomas's lever. Every morning, Thomas collects a milk wagon and carries it with his first passenger train. The wagon is often stored in the yards by Annie and Clarabelle's shed. Thomas was just crossing over the switches to couple up to the wagon when he heard a racket behind him. It was Bertie. He was right in the face, and his engine was making an awful noise. "Hello, Bertie. Come to join the rails? Very sensible," chuckled Thomas. Bertie scowled at the tank engine. "So, this is the thanks I get after I ruined my engine to get here early," huffed Bertie, trying to catch his breath. "You'd never find me out of sorts because of my rails. I just follow them and they take me wherever I need to go. Never fail with rail, that's what I..." Then there was trouble. As Thomas was crossing over the switches out of the yard, he felt a jolt and fell in between the rails. Luckily, no one was hurt. Bertie got fouled as men came to inspect the tilted tank engine. "Seems the switches weren't set properly," explained the workman. "We'll have to get a crane to put this right." Thomas went red with embarrassment as he looked down at his buffers. "Remind me, Thomas, what was it you said? Never fail with rail?" chuckled Bertie. "It certainly doesn't look like that to me." Percy the small engine brought a crane to help re-rail Thomas, and to take his first train of the day. Sir Topham had arrived to watch the operation, frowning with his arms crossed. He spoke severely to Thomas once he was placed back onto the tracks. "I hear you've been boasting to Bertie about your rails. May I remind you that without him, your branch will not run as smoothly as it usually does," said Sir Topham had. "Yes, sir," faltered Thomas. "When you return from the works, I hope you will be a more sensible engine and a better friend. Good day to you." And Sir Topham Hatt walked away. As Percy was taking Annie and Clarabelle, there was no other engine to bring Thomas to the works. So Thomas, begrudgingly, had to go to travel by truck. At first, he made a fuss about traveling by road, but found the journey rather peaceful. He got to see sights he'd never normally see by rail. A week later, Thomas was prepared and back on his branch. He met Bertie at one of the stations. "I am sorry I was so rude to you, Bertie. I got too big for my buffers. My branch line wouldn't be the same without you," sighed Thomas. "I know," giggled Bertie, "but I'm glad you've seen sense. I wouldn't want to work anywhere else." The two friends smiled at each other, and as Thomas's conductor's whistle blew, they gave cheerful toots and peeps to each other as they departed.
Coal-fashioned. The trucks had caused a lot of trouble for poor Percy. They had run away on the hill, and were thankfully stopped before they could cause any damage. The Fat Controller spoke kindly to Percy. The runaway wasn't your fault. The truck's couplings were in need of severe maintenance. I am very proud of you for pursuing them and sounding the alarm. Yes, sir, thank you, sir, smiled Percy. All the same, I think you need some time away from the coal mines. A change is as good as the rest after all. Yes, sir. Where will I go, sir? Asked Percy. Leave it to me, smiled the Fat Controller. A coal mine, hooted Mavis excitedly. Only for a short while, said the quarry manager. Percy will do your work here while you're away. The Fat Controller asked you specifically, and I know how eager you are to see more of the railway. Oh, thank you, sir. I promise I won't let you down, tittered Mavis, beaming. A few days later, Percy arrived at the quarry, and Mavis set off to the coal mine. She couldn't wait to start work. When she arrived, Mavis saw Toby arranging a line of trucks under the coal hopper. Nice to see you out and about, grinned Toby. Now you've arrived, I can return to my normal duties. I'll leave the trucks in your capable buffers. The old tram departed with a ring of his bell, and the young diesel set to work at once. Mavis enjoyed working with coal. It was different from stone, but still very dusty, as she found the soot would tickle her face. Since the coal mine had no diesel pump, Mavis would have to head a little ways down the line to fill up her tank. She returned from her fill-up one afternoon to find a line of empty trucks waiting in one of the sidings. I haven't seen those trucks before, she quizzed. Ah, those are the lot who ran away. They are just back from the works, it seems. Thomas must have dropped them off, said Mavis's driver. If those are the troublesome lot, I won't be using them, Mavis said sternly, remembering her own trouble with trucks. And she didn't. The truck sat bored in the siding as they watched Mavis go about her work. Later, as she returned from a delivery, she heard the line of trucks chattering from the siding. She rolled over to investigate. What's going on here? She asked slowly. Oh, please, Mavis, do bring us on your next delivery. We want to be useful again, they pleaded. After the stunt you lot pulled, certainly not, huffed Mavis. But we've learnt our lesson, called one truck. We won't ever cause trouble again, said another. Mavis scuttled away back to work. She knew trucks could be trouble, but something wasn't sitting right with her radiator. She stayed at the sheds with Thomas and Toby that night, telling them about the trucks. Ha, grunted Thomas. Trucks are trouble through and through. Leave them to rust, that's what I say. Coughed Toby, shooting Thomas a stern look. He then composed himself and looked at Mavis. Call me old-fashioned, but I believe everyone deserves a second chance. After all, we've all had our second chances, said Toby with a smile. Percy must be on his 10th chance at this point, muttered Thomas to himself. I want to be fair, but also don't want to be foolish, Mavis said. What if they trick me and try to run away again? Have a little faith. I think they know not to cause you any trouble, chuckled Toby. So the next day, Mavis buffered up to the trucks gently. Come along, she said. No nonsense. No nonsense, echoed the trucks. She took them to the hopper and filled them with coal. Then she pushed them carefully out of the mine and out onto the branch. Easy does it, reassured her driver as they rolled along. They soon reached the hill. Mavis put on a determined face and kept a close eye on the trucks, bracing for a runaway. But to her surprise, the trucks didn't make a peep, and they continued to have a smooth journey. When Mavis returned to the village, she found Toby waiting at the halt by the water tower. She told him how well it went. As I said, everyone deserves a second chance, even trucks, Toby said with a smile. And as she rattled off back to work, Mavis can help agree.
Edward's example. Edward was dozing comfortably in his shed. Dawn was just breaking, and he could hear the sound of people walking on gravel towards his berth. That'll be the cleaners, he whispered sleepily to himself, his eyes still too heavy to open just yet. He had grown accustomed to waking up to the sound of the station and the yard coming to life in the morning. He knew he'd have a few more minutes to rest before the firefighter and his crew arrived. He then heard the sound of an engine sputtering as it tried to turn over. He didn't think much of it at first. Sounds like Yardmaster's car is acting up again, he yawned quietly. A strange aroma then drifted under his nose, stirring him from his sleep. This was an unfamiliar part of his morning routine. Why, that's... Edward's eyes shot open and widened when he realized his shed was filled with black smoke, which in his experience could only mean one thing. Fire! Get the fire buckets from the station, quick! He yelled, his eyes darting around looking for the source of the flame. Calm down, it's only me, a croaky cry came. Edward then spotted a dejected green diesel next to him, smoke pouring from his exhaust while his driver and an inspector checked him all over. Poor Boko's face was beet red. I'm so sorry, Edward, coughed Boko. It's my motor again. I didn't mean to startle you. Edward breathed a sigh of relief. Boko had only recently been stationed at Wellsworth, and he was still getting used to the diesel's presence. It's all right, Boko. That is a worrying amount of exhaust. However, have they discovered the source of the problem yet? Not as of yet. The inspector has called in a fitter to see if they could do anything about it. I just wish my motor would work properly like any normal diesels would, sighed Boko. Edward felt sorry for Boko. I may not be a diesel, but I understand exactly where you're coming from. It's an awful feeling of wanting to be useful, but having something holding you back. I was restored to take freight cars to the harbor this morning. What will Sir Topham Hatt say if I can't take it? Worried Boko. Edward smiled reassuringly. Tell you what, why don't I take your cars for you? Oh no, I couldn't ask that of you. Not with the way I disturb you. Believe me, I've had worse morning calls. Be thankful you haven't shared a shed with the big engines. Henry then rattled past on the main line with the fast goods. Rise and shine, lazy wheels, he whistled. See what I mean? Winked Edward. And so, the old engine covered Boko's trains for the rest of the day, without fuss, while Douglas was called in to take care of Edward's services. Boko's trains were somewhat heavier than what Edward was used to, but he struggled valiantly on. He even received some whistles of encouragement from Bill and Ben when setting off from the harbor. At the end of the day, Edward returned home feeling puffed out but positive. He backed slowly into his shed as his eyes began to close by themselves. Busy day? Said a voice. Edward opened his eyes to see Boko smiling at him. I can't thank you enough for taking care of my trains today, Edward. The fitter made some improvements to my motor which he hopes will tide me over until I can visit the works. But Boko didn't get to finish, for Edward was so tired he had fallen asleep. The diesel chuckled to himself and followed suit. But the next morning, Boko woke up to find Edward looking somewhat worse for wear. His crew and firefighter couldn't get his fire going. You've overexerted yourself again, old boy. We'll have to keep you here until we get you sorted, said his fireman. Edward looked worriedly at his buffers. Boko then gave a small smile. I think you've earned a rest in the shed today. Time to see if the fitter's repairs did the trick. The diesel's motor roared happily into life, and Boko began to roll away to collect Edward's coaches. Don't forget to, called Edward. Be gentle with the coaches. Don't worry, leave it to me, answered Boko. Edward was left reassured that he and his new friend were going to get along like a shed on fire.